Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to a new story from our exciting tales. Today's story is titled The Heir to the Throne, and we hope you enjoy it. It is said that there were three brothers, Laith, Zaid, and Mansour. Their father was a just king with vast influence over the land. He had ruled for more than 20 years, during which he managed to instill security and gained the love of the people through his fairness. However, as the king grew older, the land no longer needed him. Neighboring countries had notably prospered after skilled young leaders took over. The ruling father felt that the land needed a young man to lead it after him, and he had to choose one of his sons to take the throne. He wanted to discuss this matter with the ministers, but first he decided to roam the streets in disguise. He set out early in the morning as a beggar and took a bite of an apple given to him by a passerby. While he was nibbling on it, he heard a familiar sound of shouting from afar. He rushed toward the sound and was surprised to find his eldest son, Laith, instigating a fight as usual, exploiting his position. The people looked at him with anger, and the king noticed that his son was using his strength to intimidate and control them. The beggar continued on his way until he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his youngest son, Zaid, with his innocent smile. Zaid extended his hand, giving the beggar money, unaware that he was his father. Zaid spent his money on the poor, thinking with his heart and emotions, which led many in the palace to exploit him, and the king was aware of this and had often warned him about it. The king continued on his way, checking on the state of his subjects and their problems. While doing so, he passed by his middle son, Mansour, who was joking with the subjects. The father quickly felt pleased, seeing bravery, compassion, and wisdom in him. The subjects loved and respected him, and the king had always wished that Mansour would be the heir after him. So, he made up his mind and hurried back to the palace. Upon his arrival, he ordered an emergency meeting, changed his clothes, and rushed to the meeting hall. When he arrived, silence fell in the room, and the king broke the quietness with his voice. "I have gathered you to share with you a matter that concerns me, and to find a just solution for it. As you know, I have reached the brink of death, and I am over 70 years old. This land needs a young ruler who can keep pace with its problems and find solutions in the right way. He should possess wisdom to counter the plots of enemies and compassion to win the love of the subjects. I want you to choose between my sons, the one you see fit to rule." The opinions among the ministers differed. Some wanted Laith, others wanted Zaid, and others wanted Mansour. The king nodded, perplexed by the suggestions. Suddenly he was interrupted by his advisor, Akil, who said, "My lord, you must be fair in choosing the ruler. I suggest we set up tests to evaluate the bravery and wisdom of the person who will inherit the throne after you. After the tests, we will choose the heir and send him to a wise friend of mine in a distant land to learn from him." The king's face lit up with satisfaction, and he quickly exclaimed, "This is the solution. Every week we will hold a test to determine the heir, and the tests will be devised by my advisor Akil." "We hear and obey," replied the advisor and the ministers. The father informed his sons about the tests and asked for their patience. In the first week, the sons came to a test titled Patience and Justice. The advisor tasked each of them with resolving a dispute between two villages in whatever way they deemed appropriate. Laith resorted to force, imposing it on both parties to silence the conflict, but he did not give the rightful party their due. Meanwhile, Zaid relied on his emotions and distributed money to both sides to resolve the dispute, which drained the kingdom's treasury. In contrast, Mansour took a different approach. He gathered both parties, understood the issue, and offered solutions to satisfy both sides. Mansour successfully resolved the issue wisely and fairly. In the second week, the sons and the advisor met again, and each young man was given 1,000 soldiers, tasked with defending the kingdom from the invading armies. Laith quickly prepared and launched aggressive raids without prior planning, leading to heavy losses in the army despite his victory. He returned to the kingdom with a weary army. Zaid chose to be lenient with the enemy, giving them money and making peace, which portrayed a sense of weakness in the eyes of neighboring lands and exposed them to repeated invasions. On the other hand, Mansour meticulously planned every raid and studied the enemy's weak points, exploiting them to his advantage. He returned victorious after exhausting the enemies and expanding the kingdom's borders, causing neighboring lands to fear Mansour and his astuteness. As the third week approached, the advisor gathered the sons and gave each 1,000 coins, saying, "Establish projects that will benefit your country, and let each person invest this money in their own way." Laith built castles and fortifications to protect the kingdom against enemy attacks. Meanwhile, Zaid chose to feed the poor to reduce their numbers in the land and provided them with jobs to earn a living, but he quickly ran out of money, and the profits were minimal, leading him to a loss. Mansour hastened to buy land, cultivate it, and employ the poor, resulting in the land producing crops that benefited the kingdom. The king then met with the ministers to choose the heir to the throne. The overwhelming majority favored Mansour due to his fair methods of solving problems. He will be the king who will change the course of the land. After some time, the ruler gathered his sons and informed them that these tests were set to determine the heir to the throne. After reviewing what they had invested and accomplished, Mansour was chosen as the heir. To ensure fairness for Laith and Zaid, Laith was appointed as the commander of the army, and Zaid was made responsible for the treasury's finances, but everything they did must be done in consultation with Mansour, for he was the wisest among them. To help Mansour gain experience and wisdom, he would be sent to the wise man of the mountain, a friend of the advisor, to learn from him. The brothers responded with, "We hear and obey," and they left feeling satisfied. The next morning, Mansour packed his belongings and set off to find the wise man of the mountain. On his journey, he saw a crippled man sitting on the ground under the scorching sun, begging for money. Mansour generously gave him alms, but it seemed the crippled man was not satisfied with just money. He asked Mansour where he was headed. Mansour informed him that he was going to the wise man of the mountain. The crippled man replied, "What a coincidence! I want to go to the wise man as well." Mansour saw longing in his eyes and said, "What do you think about accompanying me?" The crippled man replied, "How can I, being crippled?" Mansour reassured him, "Don't worry, you'll ride the horse and I'll continue on foot." The crippled man agreed, and after a few hours they arrived at the city of the wise man. Mansour said to the crippled man, "We have arrived. Do you need help getting down?" The crippled man looked at Mansour in surprise and said, "How can I dismount from my horse? You are the one who should leave." Mansour was taken aback and expressed his anger. "How can I leave, you thief? It is my horse." The voices rose between them until a crowd gathered, and one suggested they go to the wise man. Both the crippled man and Mansour agreed and took the path that led to the wise man. The crippled man and Mansour arrived at the court, where there was a judge, a grocer, and a carpenter. The case was that the carpenter had gone to the grocer, the butter seller, and gave him money to buy some butter, but the grocer insisted that the carpenter had given him nothing. The judge said, "Give me the money, and come back tomorrow." Afterward, Mansour entered and began to speak. "Your Honor, I am on my way to your city, and I encountered this crippled man who asked me for a ride. I did not hesitate and allowed him to ride my horse. But when we arrived, he claimed the horse was his and refused to dismount, accusing us of theft. We came here to seek our rights." The judge nodded and said, "Leave the horse and come back tomorrow to hear the ruling." Mansour left with hopes of getting his rights back. The next morning, Mansour went to the courthouse, where the lame man was waiting for him, along with the carpenter and the grocer. The judge said, "My ruling in this case is that the money belongs to the carpenter, and the grocer will receive 50 lashes. At that moment, Mansour thought to himself, how was the judge able to uncover the truth and identify the liar? The judge then summoned Mansour and the lame man, saying to them, "If I place your horse among 20 others, would you be able to identify it?" Mansour and the lame man replied, "Yes, we can." The judge mixed the horse with the 20 others and asked the lame man to find it. The lame man identified it, and so did Mansour. After returning to the courthouse, the judge said, "Based on the evidence, the horse belongs to Mansour, and the lame man will be imprisoned for a full month." Mansour was impressed by the judge's wisdom and cleverness, so he stayed at the courthouse until the judge was finished for the day. He then followed the judge home. Before reaching his house, the judge sighed and said, "Who's there? Don't try to hide. I knew you were following me from the moment we left the courthouse." Mansour answered, "It's me, Your Honor, Mansour." The judge responded with surprise, "Mansour, didn't you receive your rightful belongings? Why are you following me?" Mansour replied, "That's exactly what puzzled me. How did you know the horse was mine and the coins belonged to the carpenter?" The judge smiled and said, "Why do you ask? I usually prefer not to explain my reasoning to anyone." Mansour knelt before the judge, eager to learn the wisdom behind the decisions. The judge, impressed by his persistence, explained, "First, if the coins had belonged to the grocer, traces of grease would have remained on them due to his line of work. However, when I placed the coins in a pot of water, no grease appeared on the surface, which indicated that the coins belonged to the carpenter. As for your horse, I observed how it reacted when touched by each of you. When the lame man touched it, the horse lowered its ears and head, but when you touched it, it raised its head. That's how I knew the horse belonged to you." Mansour stood in awe of the judge's wisdom. He took a few steps forward and said, "Sir, I was sent by your friend, Counselor Akil, to learn wisdom from you. This incident has been the best teacher, and I have gained much from your insight. I thank you for that and ask for your permission to return." The judge gave him permission, and Mansour departed, carrying with him a wealth of wisdom. And with that, we may have reached the end of the story. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave your feedback in the comments. See you in a new story.